Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the tip of the Iberian Peninsula in one of my favorite cities in Europe. Today we are in Lisbon, Portugal, where we hop on board the flag carrier of Portugal, TAP Air Portugal, from their main hub here in Lisbon, all the way to the west coast of the United States in San Francisco on their A330neo in business class. This is a product I've been really wanting to fly ever since they started this service back in 2019 after acquiring the A330neos, so I'm very excited to be here today to try this out with all of you. With a 9:15 departure, we find ourselves at the airport before the sun comes up. Luckily, in Lisbon, with a good metro system, you can get yourself from downtown or pretty much anywhere in the Lisbon metro area to the airport pretty easily and for a very good cost. The airport here in Lisbon has gone through a number of renovations since it opened about 80 years ago, seeing a different terminal, seeing a number of airlines, and at the current time, it's being overgrown once more. Definitely a need for more gates, however, it's still one of the few airports in Europe that's located right within the city, meaning the city pushes right up against the airport, leaving not a whole lot of space for expansion. Across from the metro, we find the entrance to Terminal 1 here for our check-in. Terminal 1 at Lisbon houses pretty much all the airlines that aren't the low-cost carriers. Those reside in Terminal 2. Now, as we head up the escalator and into the check-in area for Terminal 1, you'll notice that they separate it by letter into a bunch of different check-in areas. What they've done is pretty much put all the other airlines in areas B through F, and saved Area A all for TAP Air Portugal. Obviously, being one of the bigger airports in Europe, there's a number of departures on a number of different airlines. So depending on what time of day you're here, this place could be absolutely packed. As mentioned earlier, check-in Area A is reserved for all the TAP Air Portugal flights, which is nice because obviously they have the highest amount of passengers and also have their own dedicated area. The only problem is it's the only one tucked away in the back corner of Terminal 1. Down the escalator and around the corner we find the TAP Portugal check-in. It's mostly self-check-in kiosks with very few agents at the counter if you do actually need assistance. To the left side, however, along the window we find the arrow pointing off to the TAP Premium check-in. First, we see the Premium Customer Center for anyone needing help from an agent. Adjacent to that is where we find the check-in for the premium customers. There's, once again, a bunch of self-check-in kiosks, but there's also a bunch more agents to actually help you check your bags for your journey. Now, security is actually located back by the rest of the check-in desks. So, after you get your bags checked in, you get your boarding passes, you head up towards the boarding gates and back towards security. Now, the last couple times I've been to Lisbon Airport, I've been flying in economy, and security has taken me a long time. However, when you're flying TAP business class, you get to access the fast track lane. Much shorter, and getting through the security checks only took us a couple minutes, if that, at this early morning hour. Through security, you head up the escalator and through the duty-free shop before getting into the terminal. Now, they have the S gates and the N gates. I'm going to take a blind guess and assume that they're the south and north gates, but in practicality, the S gates house all the Schengen flights. The N gates are all the non-Schengen flights and require an immigration check. This large rotunda here is pretty much the center of the terminal. It houses most of the shops and the restaurants. You'll find signs pointing you towards each wing of gates, but you'll also find the escalator that goes up to the lounges. Once you get up the escalator, the two lounges that you'll find are first the ANA Lounge. The ANA Lounge houses pretty much every airline that isn't TAP Portugal or a Star Alliance partner. There's also these little sleeper pods, which I definitely have taken advantage of in my non-lounge days at the Lisbon Airport. A little bit further down we find the TAP Premium Lounge. This is the older of their lounges at the Lisbon Airport, albeit a bigger lounge than their newer one. This one is for any passenger, whereas the newer lounge is only for passengers leaving the Schengen area, and we will check that out shortly. Now, since this lounge does have to house all of TAP's passengers and their partners, whether they're traveling in or outside of the Schengen area, it's got to be a pretty good size, and it does satisfy. Now, granted, I'm here early in the day, so it's not super busy, But if you look around at all of the tables and chairs, all the different options of places to sit, there's really no lack of seating or charging ports. At the back of the lounge, they had the breakfast buffet set up at this time of day, starting of course with the European cold cuts and cheese, before going around the corner to the more Western options. Then were these sweeter options, definitely more Portuguese influenced, but all of the different pastries a little bit further down. Just behind that, we find the drink section. They had the sparkling or still water, they had juices, they had sodas, they had alcohol, and they had a coffee machine. It wouldn't be Portugal, however, if one end of the drinks didn't have an entire wine fridge. I decided to grab myself a nice breakfast, a mix of Western and European options, a coffee, and enjoyed the morning arrivals into the Lisbon Airport. I will say that I had to leave some time, considering that after this lounge I did still have to go through immigration before getting to my gate, so I made sure to leave time for that, plus visiting the new tap lounge. Before heading out that way, of course, I had to check out one last perk that is only available in this lounge at the Lisbon Airport, not the new lounge, and that is the shower suites. Now, it might not be the largest or the nicest shower suite we've come across in our lounges, however, it was plenty big for what we needed today. Place for a suitcase, place for a backpack, my clean clothes, my dirty clothes. They gave us a towel and a bath mat, and in the shower was a 3-in-1 shampoo, conditioner, body wash. After that, I figured I'd finally head out through immigration onto the end gates and see this brand new tap lounge. Now, the lounge is super easy to find, as it's immediately through immigration before you even get to the gates. This lounge opened less than 3 weeks before my flight, so it was still fresh. Dubbed the Atlântico Lounge, it's the only lounge inside of passport control, and as TAP operates a lot of connecting journeys, it's nice for passengers to not require passport control just to access a lounge in their short stay here. It also helps to relieve the load on the main TAP lounge, as there's Star Alliance passengers to the Americas, Africa, and UK to use this lounge instead. It is admittedly smaller of a space and lacks the showers, but they did try to tie in some of the more Portuguese styles throughout. My thoughts on this lounge is that I'm very grateful for their addition of a second lounge, specifically for non-Schengen passengers, but why on earth would they make it so small? Unless they have plans on opening a new terminal for themselves sometime soon, although I doubt it. We left the lounge a little bit early, past the sardine shops, and onto the gates to go find our flight today to San Francisco. Now, the terminal here at Lisbon is, as mentioned, admittedly overcrowded and small. It's pretty much just one hallway. You'll see gates as 45 and 45A, 42, 42A, for example. Basically, every gate has a jet bridge gate and a bus gate. We did get a view of a number of the aircraft parked at the gates here as we made our way out to our gate. The only airplane, however, that we did not have a great view of was, of course, our airplane. That's because we couldn't get into the gate area at the time since they were preparing it for departure, and they were servicing the airplane, so it was partially blocked by food trucks and stuff like that. Luckily, directly adjacent to us was another TAP Portugal A330neo, this one not for us, but actually heading off to one of their Brazilian destinations. Now, as mentioned, TAP and Lisbon Airport use gate holding areas that require a document check. Essentially, get to your gate about 5 minutes before boarding, get in the line to have your passport and boarding pass checked, they give you a little sticker on the back, and then you're let into this little holding area roped off. There are restrooms, so don't worry about that if you do show up a little bit early. And then, shortly after we were in there, they started setting up the boarding areas, the premium lane, and then boarding groups A, B, and C. After not waiting too long, maybe boarding about 20 minutes behind schedule, finally they scanned our boarding passes and we were off to get on board our A330neo. Very excited, considering this is a product I've been hoping to try for a very long time, specifically on this route, so I was excited to see what business class product we were going to find on board. And with that, I welcome you on board the TAP Portugal A330neo's business class here. Set up in a 1-2-1 configuration, alternating closer to the window and closer to the aisle. The odd numbered seats, like what I chose, are a little bit closer to the window and offer a bit more privacy with that countertop between you and the aisle, although the even numbered seats weren't horrible. If you're going to be sitting with a partner, you're going to want one of those odd numbered seats as well to be a little bit closer to your seatmate. Before long, I found my way to seat 7A, my seat on our flight to San Francisco today. And while everyone else climbs on board and gets into their seat, we're going to take a moment to look around ours. First off, the headrest. It was super comfortable. It slides, it tilts, and it folds in at the edges for maximum comfort. The seat itself was alright. It wasn't exactly the most comfortable seat, definitely nothing like United's Polaris, but definitely softer than last week's topic of the Airline seats. The armrest along the window here was nice to rest your arm on, and when you set up for bed mode, you could also flip it up to give yourself a little more room and it not sticking out towards you. My seat had 2 windows, great for seeing the view slightly in front and behind us, in addition to looking straight out at everyone else boarding our airplane. In front of me is the seatback TV. It's tucked into the seatback in front of us, but with this little lever here, we can pull it out, make it a lot easier for us to use once we're in flight. The only problem with these is that they've got to be stored for taxi, takeoff, and landing. Below that is kind of a funky little tray table. It pulls out from under the TV, but then it swivels from there, so that you do have a big enough tray table for the meal services, just definitely a different style than I'm used to. Below that is the footrest, which is plenty wide but not super deep if you're pretty tall. There is the inclining footrest below that, although truth be told, in flight, I didn't find myself using it all that much. To the right of the TV is the seatback in front of you, complete with a little coat hook on top, and also at the bottom is a literature pocket. They didn't keep anything in there, so I was free to use it for whatever I wanted once we got in flight. You can see here the entrance to my seat. In addition, this is the same area where we found the headset and the charging ports. You'll see 2 USB charging ports and the universal charging port in addition to that headset jack. Just above that was this little cubby. Not super big, but plenty for storing all of my chargers that I needed in flight. Above that is another armrest. This one's just as comfortable as the other side, and just like the other side, it also folds down. Above that is the seat and light controls. We'll revisit these a little bit more once we get in flight. And above that is the main counter for the seat. Plenty for storing your laptop or whatever else you might need while you're using the tray table for the meal. Behind that counter, you'll see the shelf here. There's a few things here that we'll look at. First off, you'll find the remote. The remote can also be popped out to use as controls and a keyboard while you're lying flat. You also have this little sliding door to access pretty much the only enclosed storage for anything larger than a phone charger. And then all the in-seat literature they want for you is kept above that on this little shelf with the little cubby here. And lastly, unfortunately, there is no overhead air vents on board these A330neos. Now the headphones that we get are actually incredibly comfortable, the same as Airline and Scandinavian Airlines. Super comfortable, the noise cancelling is pretty good, to the point where you can sleep with them on and be plenty comfortable. There was also the bottle of still water supplied to each passenger at their seat. Then there was the amenity kits, which were admittedly a little basic. They did have whatever you'd need, however, considering they had toothbrushes, the eye mask and earplugs, some socks, and a little lotion. Unfortunately, no slippers on this flight though. Now the pillow was the first part of the bedding we had to take a look at. For starters, it's a great design and it's a good size. The only problem, it's about as thin as a pancake. There's really no sustenance to this pillow, so if you need something firmer or something with more volume, you can expect to supplement it with something else. Then there was the blanket. It was nothing special, perfectly average, not too thick, not too fuzzy, but especially with no overhead air vents, it was plenty to be comfortable and sleep on this flight. Now TAP has actually been around for just under 80 years, where it began with a fleet of 2 aircraft of DC-3s with the surplus of them after the Second World War. TAP's first intercontinental service was to their Portuguese colonies of Luanda, Angola, and Maputo, Mozambique, in addition to their domestic route between Lisbon and Porto, still important routes to this day. The 50s brought their first wave of privatization, which gave them the launch they needed to spread through Europe and Northern Africa. The 60s brought TAP's regular service to their roots in Brazil, with Rio de Janeiro service beginning with the Constellation. The 60s also saw TAP becoming Europe's first all-jet airline, along with other fanfare of their growth. The 70s saw their first wide-bodies and their US growth as they added New York and Boston, two of the largest Portuguese diasporas outside of Europe. In this time, however, they returned to a state-owned airline, but also Mozambique and Angola got their independence, lessening TAP's need for their African services. They did, however, get their current TAP Air Portugal branding at this time. The 80s was a mostly refresh time for the airline. New fleet and products were unveiled along with their Atlantis magazine and a museum for the airline. In the 90s, TAP solidified some partnerships while also focusing more on vacation destinations in places like Tel Aviv and Asia, as well as service to Boston from their Azores Islands. In this century, TAP has grown their transatlantic markets heavily, while also acquiring Portuguese airlines like Portugalia, which is essentially a regional carrier within Portugal, but also around the Iberian Peninsula and Western Europe, and also the non-Airbus part of the fleet. Their route network has expanded greatly now with the A330ceos and neos, allowing them to reach places in the US and South America. The A321neo has also proved to be a heck of an airplane for them, making it so they can serve lower density long-haul markets, like Washington, D.C. and Toronto, but also so they can fly to now 11 destinations throughout Brazil with a mix of aircraft, some places multiple times per day. As of recent, after inquiries from IAG to purchase them up, it sounds like they'll be going a different route, but also heading back into the private sector at some point this year. Regardless, for an airline with such a rich history, I am so glad to be able to fly them and see their current affairs here on one of their bigger routes at the time. As is tradition, we get in flight and we look through the in-flight entertainment, which first starts off with a video about TAP Portugal and this aircraft. Notably, it can be skipped at any time. They also offer you the ability to personalize your in-flight entertainment using an individual code found on your boarding pass. Now, personally, I think TAP has one of the better in-flight entertainment systems that you'll find, obviously with a number of categories to explore. Starting off with the movies here, you'll see that there is 152 individual titles. They can be sorted by 13 different categories, each of those categories with a large number of selections. Plenty for people to watch if they are flying this airline more than once. Then the TV, you'll see 87 titles. As far as I could see, it was 87 individual titles, not episodes. Different than most airlines, but good, meaning there's more selection. Fortunately, pretty much every show had multiple episodes. Depending on the show meant there would be more or less episodes. There was a ton of music. You'll see all different albums from American music to European music to Brazilian music. Full albums with plenty of songs. A unique area on their in-flight entertainment screens was this Get Inspired section, which had all different information and videos from areas of Portugal or their different Portuguese areas. Then, fairly normal, is the Kids section, with movies, TV shows, music, and games specifically geared towards kids. They also had information on how to connect to the Wi-Fi. In addition to the Wi-Fi, however, which we will look at shortly, you could also connect your phone. Separately from iMessage or WhatsApp here, you could use normal messaging rates to text people while on board. Then was the About Us section. Videos and text about the airline, about their food, about Star Alliance, and about all of the TAP merchandise that you could purchase. And then because it's Portugal, they have all different videos on the wine experience throughout Portugal and Brazil. And to test yourself, they also have a wine quiz based on those videos in both English and Portuguese. Now, we did get a paper menu at our seat, however, we could also access the food and wine menus directly on our seatback TVs. There was also surveys, mostly for the airport lounges. Then there was the weather. It defaulted to Lisbon and San Francisco, but you could also add what seemed to be any of the TAP destinations. Then there was the map, fully adjustable, not like most of the A330 and A330neo maps you'll find around the world. Here you can pinch to move and zoom just like you would on your phone, in addition to having all of the flight's information. Now, with all this entertainment, it's pretty easy to get lost in your seatback TV. Fortunately, it's all navigable based on this hamburger menu in the top left of the screen that drops down. In addition, if you find any content you want to watch or listen to later on, you can easily add it to your favorites and access that in the top right of your screen up here. In addition, while watching any of the films, they also had features such as the recommendations on the right side of the screen where you could see similar titles, and you could also reduce it to a picture-in-picture, so you could navigate throughout the screen and continue searching while still watching your movie or TV show in the bottom right. As mentioned, TAP does have Wi-Fi on board their flights. You can connect to it pretty easily by going to your settings and opening up the Wi-Fi page and opening the TAP Portugal Wi-Fi. It should auto-load the website to help you connect. If not, you can use the QR code on your seatback or on the TV. Once connected, you'll get to the main website. You'll find information about your flight, but you'll also find the different internet packages you can buy. The different options they have are a messaging service for 1 hour, for 3 hours, or for the full flight. They're priced differently, obviously, with $10 being the cheapest for 1 hour of Wi-Fi, $20 for 3 hours, and $30 for the full flight. Unfortunately, on TAP, business class does not get any discount on their Wi-Fi. With our pre-dining hot towels passed out, dining was upon us, and I was more than excited to indulge, not only because of the wine pairings I discussed with the crew, but also because of a simple flying article I read just last year. Last year, TAP Portugal partnered with The Art of Tasting Portugal to refresh their long-haul in-flight menus for the next couple years until April 2025, with food from various local chefs. The plan was for a new menu to roll out every 2 months, done by each chef. This menu was put together by Chef Oscar Guiadas of G Posada Restaurant. And while I've never heard of him or the restaurant in my limited time in Portugal, I was happy to get a taste of his cuisine on board. You'll see the menu here consisting of a post-departure meal and then a pre-arrival snack as well. Now, I mentioned the Portuguese wines. I asked the flight attendant for her recommendation on red wines. She gave me a little bit of both and then came back later to ask which one I liked better, so I could get a full glass of that to go along with my meal. Our meal, except for the dessert, was served all on one tray. The starter was a river fish salad, beetroot and orange salad on the side of that. For the main course, I chose to go with the braised veal with a chestnut puree and mushrooms. We also have to give some love to the tap engraved silverware. For dessert on tap, there's 3 options, and rather than make you choose, you get a little bit of everything. So there was some cookies and cream ice cream, a little fruit cup, and some excellent Portuguese cheese to go along with the crackers. Of course, to go along with that, I had to go with a nice glass of their port wine. And as if that wasn't enough, while we were eating, they came around with a basket of chocolates, milk, dark, and white, for each passenger to take their selection. Now, the plan for this flight wasn't exactly to sleep, considering it's an all-daytime flight and we arrive in the late afternoon in San Francisco. That being said, that meal had me just about in a food coma, so I was plenty tired. That was a good excuse to explore the seat modes of this business class seat. Using the buttons on the side of the seat, we start in our fully seated position. From there, it goes into the relaxed position. I spent a lot of the flight in this position. What it does is tilts not only the seat back a bit, but it also gives a tilt to the seat cushion. Oftentimes, I find myself needing to recline the seat a little bit more or less. I found this to be plenty comfortable, especially with the footrest sticking up, and found myself laying like this after I woke up from my rest. From there, however, with the other preset, we can bring it fully flat. Once fully flat, we can continue dressing the bed, not only with the amenities we were given, but also with all of those armrests and headrests to make the most comfortable bed possible. Once fully flat, we'll slide the headrest up, we'll fold this armrest up, and the other armrest down. That makes the biggest possible sleeping surface for us. Only thing that can make it better is if we had a mattress pad on top of that. First things first, we used the pillow that was given to each passenger. It looks great, but as mentioned, it's awfully thin. In order to get fully comfortable, I had to fold it in half. Some passengers use sweatshirts or other clothing items to bulk it up a bit. Then was the comforter. It was plenty large, wide, and long, so you never had anything sticking out. Although truth be told, it was a little bit warm in this cabin, so I didn't end up needing it while I was sleeping on board today. All said and done though, it made for a pretty comfortable bed for our 12-hour flight to San Francisco. Looking at the footwell, however, the only drawback is that it is a bit narrow. So while you do have room for your feet if you lay on your back, once you roll onto your sides, you find it a little bit cramped. Not really able to stagger your feet, and your knees end up pressing against the hard plastic seat shell. To help prepare for sleep, we can also use the light button on our seat control panel to turn off the lights in that footwell. Although truth be told, it was so bright in the cabin with the daytime flight, didn't make a whole lot of a difference. You can see the privacy here while in bed mode as well. Anyone walking past will probably be able to see you, but anyone in their seat, you're pretty much out of sight. I slept for about 6 hours, and that's pretty much only because I set an alarm. It was awfully turbulent, however. This happened to be the day that multiple airplanes reached over 800 miles per hour on their transatlantic crossings from America to Europe. So we were fighting those winds, and it was bumpy. First stop is to the lavatories. Now, the A330neos are usually fairly basic, albeit modern. You'll see from the doors and the door locks and the floors, it's a little bit newer than the older products. Not really any amenities more than refreshing wipes, but you will see the wood paneling on the front of the sink. Pretty much the only personal touch from Air Portugal. A little under 4 hours from our arrival into San Francisco, this was about as dark as the cabin got the entire flight. Admittedly, economy was bright for most of the flight, considering they couldn't get everyone back there to close their window shades. This was a good time for me to enjoy a mid-flight snack. In the front galley, they had some biscuits, crackers, and pretzels as little snacks. I had that alongside some tea and ginger ale. Not much later, as we were crossing the Rocky Mountains, it was time for our last meal service. Now, the menu didn't go too in-depth into what this would include. As a matter of fact, it only said, before landing, a light meal will be served. So it was somewhat of a surprise. This one, however, was a bit more breakfasty than what was supposedly a breakfast meal. It consisted of the classic European cold cuts and cheese, alongside a little cheese omelet. Next to that was a smoked fish with some mandarin oranges, along with a little side salad and a piece of bread. The route from Lisbon to San Francisco actually makes a ton of sense from a number of fronts. First off, there's a large Portuguese, or more specifically Azorean population in the East Bay and Central Valley of California. That's the reason why Azores Airlines has run their Lisbon to Terceira to Oakland route seasonally for over 20 years. On top of that, there's a number of similarities between San Francisco and Lisbon. Lisbon being known to us as San Francisco's older sister, or the San Francisco of Europe. The similarities start from sitting at nearly the exactly same latitude and geographical position, leading to near identical weather patterns. Lisbon is a city built on hills, as is San Francisco. To be more specific, each city is built on exactly 7 hills. Both cities with their own cable and streetcars as part of their past public transit, both with near identical bright orange bridges, both have histories of severe earthquakes, both have some of the best wines in the entire world. Street art and a coffee and food culture alike, the similarities go on. No wonder why we see so many people from each city wanting to visit the other, and more often than not, enjoying it quite a lot. TAP had to acknowledge this in 2018 after acquiring their A330neos and expanding to Chicago and Washington, and then shortly after announcing San Francisco. To compete with San Francisco's growth on the international front, TAP's prices on these routes are beyond competitive. One-way fares below $400 in economy and below $2,000 in business. Even lower if you connect onwards throughout Europe with business class fares under $1,000 to Spain, England, Ireland, France, and Italy. With their stopover program, you can even enjoy Lisbon for a day or two on your way to your final destination, all built into your same ticket. Last year, TAP celebrated its 4th year of continued service on this route, and their partnership with United and Star Alliance at San Francisco. While we don't have an exact look at the load factors at this time, I can say that on my flight, during the lowest point of tourism in the year, we had only 2 empty seats in business class, and economy seemed to be at least 75% full, on a midweek flight in February. As we taxi into a very rainy San Francisco after the much less common landing on the 19s, a bit about what we think about TAP's long-haul business class and the value of the ticket that I purchased. Lisbon's airport, in my opinion, is one of the better European airports with one main drawback. There just isn't enough gates, so there's a roughly 50% chance that you end up with a bus gate. Other than that, they have 2 TAP lounges now, one for all customers and one for non-Schengen passengers. The larger one has more amenities, but you still have to go through immigration. I just wish that they'd add shower suites to the international lounge. Other than that, the terminal is laid out simply enough, just lacking some needed space. Boarding was fairly organized, and once on board, I was more than happy with the product that I saw. The odd-numbered seats had more privacy, but the even-numbered seats weren't that bad. The space in the seat was nice, the seat was comfy, and most importantly, there was plenty of in-seat storage, which is important when there's no space for your bag. The seat was awfully comfortable and had plenty of space for your feet, which equated to a great bed. My one complaint is that the pillow was about as thick as a pancake. I folded it in half to have enough cushion and saw other people supplementing it with sweatshirts and other items. Even when I wasn't sleeping though, I was insanely relaxed to the point where the descent was disappointing. The food was top notch. For business class food between Europe and North America, might be the best I've ever had, not to mention the absolute god tier wines. The crew was incredible, every interaction with them was great. They even offered to let me and my friend move to sit next to each other, and even when the purser briefly asked me to make sure I wasn't recording the crew, she did it very nicely. Each service was interactive. They weren't shy about sharing their thoughts on some great choices and pairings. The cost is the last big thing we need to mention, however, because compared to other European carriers, they blow the competition out of the water. For comparison, Iberia also flies to San Francisco, but from Madrid obviously instead of Lisbon. Flights on Iberia in business class average over $1,000 more than TAP, and even more if you're connecting with TAP through Lisbon to somewhere else in Europe or Northern Africa. Compared to other European giants like British Airways, Lufthansa, and Swiss, TAP is multiple thousands of dollars less than the competition. So, as if it wasn't enjoyable enough, now it feels like a steal, regardless of which cabin class you're in. This route excites me. I love Portugal, especially Lisbon and the surrounding areas that I visited. It wasn't super feasible before the A330neos due to the higher demand in other places with closer ties like Brazil, New York, DC, Bissau, and Angola. But now that the service exists, I hope it stays. The load factor of this specific flight gives me hope. Just because if this is off-peak, I'd assume summer flights are 100% full or close to it. They even announced that for their summer service, they'll move from 5 times weekly to 6 times weekly between Lisbon and San Francisco. I was actually fairly surprised at the amount of Portuguese flying to San Francisco to visit, and I'm always proud to share my hometown with others from around the globe. So I thank TAP for giving that opportunity year-round to Portuguese and others with the one stop in Lisbon. I will 110% be back with TAP in the future, and I'll definitely be back to Lisbon. That's enough for me though. Let me know your thoughts below, and until next Sunday, safe travels, and I'll see y'all next time.